Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to hear evidence from Mr. Carl Stokes, who carried out fire risk assessments on behalf of the TMO and the Council. So, Mr. Millett, are you ready to call Mr. Stokes?
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the panel. I now call Mr. Carl Stokes, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Stokes. I understand that you're going to take the oath.
Sir.
Right. Have you got the testament there? Could you hold the testament in your right hand, please, and read the words on the screen?
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Now do sit down. Make yourself comfortable. There's some water there if you'd like it. And just take a moment to get yourself set up.
Thank you,
Right.
sir.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Stokes, good morning.
Good morning.
And can I start by thanking you very much for coming to the inquiry and assisting us with our investigations? We're extremely grateful to you. My questions are intended to be short and simple. Sometimes they don't work out that way. So if you'd like me to repeat the question or ask it in a different way, I can do that. Can I also ask you please to keep your voice up so that the person who sits to your right can get down everything you're saying fully and clearly? Also, please, can I advise you not to shake your head or nod, because a no or a yes, as the case may be, does not come out on the transcript. We're going to take scheduled breaks, one mid-morning and one mid-afternoon on each day that you're giving evidence. But if you'd like a break at any other time, please just say and we can take a break. Now, you've made two witness statements following the fire at the tower. The first witness statement is dated the 28th of September 2018, and that is at CST 403063. Can we please have that up? Is that the first page of your first witness statement?
Yes, sir.
And can we go, please, to page 58? You'll see a date and a signature. Is that your signature just above the date there?
Yes, sir.
Can we please go to CST 3030186, please? Is that your second witness statement?
Yes, sir.
And if we go to page 44, we'll see a signature just above the date, 13th March 2020. Is that your signature?
Yes, sir.
Did you write these statements yourself?
Yes, sir.
Can you confirm that they are true?
Yes, sir.
Have you discussed your evidence with anybody before coming here today?
No. Legal team.
Legal team. Now, I'm going to start substantive questions with an overview of your experience, if I may. And is it right that before you qualified as a fire risk assessor...
Sorry, please. Yeah. Just forgive me a moment, would you, Mr. Millett?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Right. If you just... You can run it. Okay. Your transcript running right? Sorry.
Good.
Sorry, there was a slight pause on the transcript. We've sorted that out.
Very well. If it happens, I'll keep an eye on it, Mr. Chairman, and if it happens again, we'll try and sort it out. Before you qualified as a fire risk assessor, you served in the armed forces, I think, didn't you?
Correct.
And you did that for 9 years until 1986.
Correct.
And in 1986, you joined the Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service.
Correct.
Yes. And you qualified as an operational firefighter, I think.
Correct.
And during that time, you were seconded to the Fire Safety Department. Is that right?
It was part of the qualifying period, yes.
Yes. And you would inspect buildings, including high-rise buildings.
Yes.
Yes. And to clarify, did that include high-rise blocks of flats?
Not on a day-to-day basis, because that was not, high-rise flats were not part of the fire safety order.
Right. What about residential buildings above 18 metres in height?
At that time, probably not on a daily basis, but it would have been undertaken where at that particular time the fire service would do it as part of familiarisation visits.
And in 1994, I think you then transferred to the Oxfordshire Fire and Rescue Service, didn't you?
Correct.
And then you spent the majority of your time there in the Fire Safety Department, I think.
Correct.
And is it right that both before and after the enactment of the Regulatory Reform Order 2005, which we call the RRO, or FSO, you were in that role.
Yes.
Yes. And you, I think, were employed in that department until you retired from it in September 2009.
Correct.
Yes. And is it right that since September 2009 you've been working as a fire risk assessor, operating as the sole director of CS Stokes and Associates Limited?
Yes.
And who are your associates?
None.
None, so it's just a name.
It was advised that that was the best way when I set the company up.
Right. On 24th September 2009, you started working for Salvas Consulting Limited as a fire risk assessor on a 6-month employment contract.
Yes.
That's correct, is it?
Yes.
Yes. And is it right that after you retired from Oxfordshire FRS, but before you started work for Salvas, did you undertake any independent fire risk assessments?
Without looking back, probably yes.
Right. Did you do any FRA, which I'll use for shorthand, did you do any FRA work in parallel with working for Salvas?
Yes.
You did. What was that?
Buildings, as I was setting myself up as a company.
I see. So while you were employed at Salvas, you worked on the side as a fire risk assessor, did you?
Yes, I was just subcontracting with Salvas.
Right, I see. When did you stop working for Salvas?
I can't give you a precise date, sorry.
Right. It was a 6-month employment contract.
Yes.
I take it from that it wasn't an exclusive employment contract. They allowed you to work
Yes.
as a fire risk assessor on the side. Is that right?
Correct.
In
Yes.
what? Yes. In what passed for your spare time?
Well, I'm sorry, I think what you said earlier was you acted as a subcontractor for Salvas. Did that mean they asked you to do specific jobs?
Yes, I mean, I worked on the contract for RBKC TMO. I also undertook some other work for Salvas as they required me to do.
Exactly, as and when they required, and when they didn't have a requirement, you were free to do whatever you wanted to do. Is that
Yes.
how it worked?
Yes.
As I'd understood it, you were actually employed by Salvas, but that's not right.
I was a subcontractor.
I see. Did you bid for any TMO work while you were subcontracted to Salvas?
No.
Is it right that you were directly retained by the TMO as their fire risk assessor from the autumn of 2010?
So I think when the high-rise contract came to an end,
Salvas high-rise contract?
yes,
Yes.
they then asked for tender for the medium.
Yes. And that was the point when you became directly retained by the TMO,
Yes.
not before that?
Yes, that's
Right.
correct.
And when did you stop working for the TMO?
It would have been the end of 2017. So I'm trying to look in my mind, trying to think of a date. It was towards the end of 2017, November time.
During the period autumn 2010 to 2017, while you were working for or subcontracted by the TMO, did you do FRAs for anybody else?
Yes.
You did. How much of your time was spent working for the TMO on FRAs, and how much of your time was spent working on FRAs for other people or organisations?
Hard to say, really. It was not as a this is 1 day a week or something like that. Sometimes it could be 2 days in a week. Sometimes it would be one. Sometimes it could be 3 days in a month.
Right.
I was allocated work, FRAs, and then the criteria was this is when they have to be done. Undertake the work.
Was the TMO your biggest client?
For a portfolio of numbers of buildings, yes.
In terms of your revenue?
I can't tell you that. I don't know.
You don't know. You don't have a feel for that, do you?
No. No.
Right. Are you still working as a fire risk assessor?
No.
When did you stop?
So I can't remember the exact date. 2008, May 18.
And why did you stop?
My insurance company didn't renew my insurance.
Did they tell you why?
Yes.
Why was that?
I can't remember the exact words. It was for financially liabilities. I have got the letter if you...
Sorry, do you want to finish your answer. So sorry.
So I have got the letter if you require the letter.
Can we then turn to your experience and training and start first with Oxfordshire Fire and Rescue Service? Can we go please to your first witness statement, page 5, paragraph 10? And you say there, following the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order 2005 coming into force in October 2006, I spent a significant amount of my final 3.5 years in the fire service auditing the significant findings of responsible persons carrying out FRAs, fire risk assessments. When the RRO came into force, did you receive any training on its requirements from Oxfordshire Fire and Rescue Service?
Yes.
What was that training?
There was a suite of training at the time. I can't remember the exact wording of all the courses, but I think I provided a list of all the courses for you.
I see. So that was provided for you by Oxfordshire.
Yes.
And we can tell from those certificates and those details who gave that training, can we?
Yes.
Well, we'll come to that in detail. When you say you were auditing the significant findings of the responsible persons carrying out FRAs, what did that involve? What did that auditing involve?
So you would be given a premises, it would come up on the computer system, or the supervisory officer would tell you, these are the buildings we are looking at. You would make contact, arrange for a date to go to the building, visit the building, look at all the documentation, walk around the building, look at the FRA. Sorry, I was going to use fire risk assessment. Is it all right to use it?
FRA is better.
Yeah. To look at the FRA significant findings from their documentation, and then score it as per the scoring charts that were provided.
I see. And did you make these audit visits on a regular basis, or only when there was something specific that you were told you needed to look at, like a potential deficiency which might lead to an enforcement?
So depending how the criteria, I think you could safely say the criteria evolved over time because the fire safety order was new. So the criteria was that if it was reported as a deficiency, or someone needed to look at it from another agency, if there was an after fire incident, so if there'd been a fire in the building, the operational crews would then ask the fire safety team to go out. There was a computer generated system. The fourth one would be as and when probably not the right term to use, but flavour of the month. So there could be a theme highlighted by a senior officer, I want you to go and look at. This could be done because of a national incident, other fire brigades highlighting, say, a hotel chain that they'd prosecuted. You've got that hotel chain within your area, please go look at that hotel.
I see. But there was, I get the impression from that answer that there were specific reasons to go and look, rather than having a system of making spot checks on whether building owners or responsible persons' FRAs were up to scratch. Is that right?
At that time, that would be the way the system worked.
Can we go to paragraph 11 of this statement, please, just below it? And you say this, on 10th December 2007, having undertaken the relevant training course, I was awarded the Fire Risk Assessment Certificate by the Northern Ireland Fire Safety Panel and CS Todd & Associates Limited in recognition of my demonstration of proficiency verified by examination. And you go on to say that enabled me to carry out or audit suitable and sufficient FRAs under the FSO. This was the standard course attended by fire safety officers in my brigade at the time. Now, in respect of that training course, did any of it focus on high-rise blocks of flats?
To be honest, I can't remember exactly what it was a 5-week course, so I'm going to say yes, some of it would have focused on that.
You don't remember, though?
Without looking at the content of the course, no, I can't remember.
What about external facades? Did it cover external facades?
On residential buildings?
Yes.
I would have thought not.
Why is that?
because they're not covered in the residential buildings. The external facades not covered in the fire safety order.
External walls of high-rise blocks of flats
Yes.
in multiple occupation, naturally
Yes.
enough. Yes, you say not covered. Did anybody tell you that external facades were not covered under the RRO?
It was covered on training courses, yes.
Right. What about disabled persons? In respect of this training, did any of it focus on vulnerable occupants?
In residential or...
In residential buildings.
it would be covered in residential buildings as far as the fire safety order covered disabled.
Did any of the training on the fire safety guidance, did you get any training on the fire safety guidance available at the time entitled Fire Safety Risk Assessment Sleeping Accommodation, published in June 2006?
The sleeping guide?
Sleeping guide, yes.
Yes.
You did. Did it focus on the use of PAS 79 in its 2007 edition?
Yes.
Before you completed the course in December 2007, had you actually carried out any fire risk assessments on your own?
No, not 2007.
No. And after the training, how often did you undertake fire risk assessments?
I wouldn't have undertaken them because I work for the fire service.
I see. So you were in the role only of auditing other people's
Yes.
fire risk assessments, not carrying out your own?
Correct, because I worked for the fire service, so you cannot work and do that sort of work, undertake that work. I'll clarify that by saying that I actually did undertake some fire risk assessments for fire stations.
Yes. When you did your work for the Oxfordshire Fire Service after December 2007, once you'd become certified, how did that assist your job at that stage?
As an auditing officer, it gave you better insight.
And as an auditing officer, after December 2007, did you audit FRAs of any high-rise blocks of flats? In other words, residential buildings in multiple occupation exceeding 18 metres in height.
I'm going to say no, because in Oxfordshire, I think there's only 5 in the whole county.
And you didn't audit them?
They were county council owned. I had input and I've walked around them, but I cannot remember ever auditing them because there was a specific officer who undertook liaison with the county council. Right.
The reason I ask you is because you say, well, let's go to it, SAL 709, page 2. This is, page 1 you can see is your CV that you sent to Salvas. And on page 2, you say, and it's 2/3 of the way down the text in the box, which is entitled in blue caps, "In my previous role, my main duties, responsibilities were," you say, "I have experience of undertaking risk assessments and audits of the common parts of high-rise residential tower blocks under the fire safety order and also fire assessment of the private flat-stroke dwellings under Section 24 of the Housing Act." What was the basis for that statement as at September 2009, Mr. Stokes?
Because I would have walked around the council buildings in Oxford, the towers.
I see. But you say you have experience of undertaking risk assessments and audits, so not just walking round.
Well, that would have been walking around, looking at them is an audit. You were walking around the building.
Well, you were doing more than that, weren't you? You were also looking, presumably, at the fire risk assessor's fire risk assessment of those buildings and making sure it was compliant.
Correct. Yes.
Yes. And when you say experience of undertaking risk assessments, what was that?
That would be the undertaking.
So you did undertake fire risk assessments of high-rise buildings while you were still at Oxfordshire?
Only as part of my role, yes.
But I don't understand. Your role, you said, was auditing other people's FRAs, but here you're saying that you have experience of undertaking risk assessments. What are we to understand from that? Did you undertake fire risk assessments before you left Oxfordshire?
Not in my own right, no.
So what does this mean in your CV? I have experience of undertaking risk assessments.
Sorry, I can't answer that question.
Well, is it correct or is it incorrect?
Well, it is correct. That's what I've written at the time, yes.
But was it a correct statement of fact at the time?
Yes.
So then, if it was correct at the time that you had experience of undertaking risk assessments of the common parts of high-rise residential tower blocks, when was that, first of all? What was that experience?
So I'm just trying, this is 2009,
Yes.
you said.
It was your CV you put forward as
Yeah.
to get the job at Salvas.
So it would have been going around, as working with the fire service, going around the buildings in Oxford, undertaking audits of them, but looking at the fire risk assessment.
No, it doesn't say that, does it? It says, I have experience of undertaking risk assessments and audits. Was it true or was it untrue that, in fact, you did have no experience of undertaking risk assessments?
I would have undertaken the risk assessments on the training exercises, but not as per se of my own company.
Well, that's a misleading statement then, isn't it? Because it tends to suggest that you have experience of undertaking them rather than being trained to do so.
But to undertake the audit, I would have undertaken the risk assessment to know what, as part of the training criteria, to know what the audit and the risk assessment had to do. So I'm getting confused.
Yeah. Did you ever actually produce an FRA before leaving Oxfordshire?
Not on a high rise, no. Not on a high rise basis as my own company, no.
So the statement, I put it to you, so the statement, I have experience of undertaking risk assessments of the common parts of high-rise residential tower blocks was incorrect.
The first part, undertaking risk assessments and writing them up, is, you are correct. I undertook audits of those buildings.
Yeah. So why did you say, I have experience of undertaking risk assessments when that was incorrect?
Looking at it in hindsight and the way you've just explained it, I agree with what you're saying. But my writing it, I have experience of undertaking risk assessments, because to undertake the audit, I would have undertaken the risk assessment. That was how the way my mind was thinking.
By the time you retired from the Oxfordshire Fire and Rescue Service, would it be right to say that you'd had 3 years of post-training, three years of fire safety experience, let me put it that way very generally, at least as an auditor in the way you've explained, and less than 2 years experience as a certified fire risk assessor?
Correct.
And while you were employed by Oxfordshire Fire and Rescue Service, I think you've told us before, but just confirm, you weren't also working independently as a fire risk assessor?
I set the company up in the February, so I was in preparation to start.
Yes, but you didn't actually carry out any FRAs yourself until you actually left Oxfordshire. Is that right?
So it's a long time ago. I did undertake some just before I left, when I was on leave. That might have happened, but I can't give you a definite dates of when I actually started, or the first ones.
Let's stick with this document and go to page 4, please. Can we look at some of the training courses that you've set out there and qualifications, technical qualifications as you describe them? There are those there set out running from the bottom of the page, 1992, to the top of the page, 2009, Associate Member, Institute of Arbitrators, and the grade on the right-hand side. You've also set out your qualifications in your second witness statement at page 45, if we can go to that, please. This is Appendix 1 of your second witness statement. And at 45, we can see the first page of a number of pages making up the Appendix 1 to your second witness statement, which is your qualifications. Just look at those in a little bit of detail, if we can. If we look at rows 2 and 3 in the table on page 45, we can see your IOSH and NEBOSH qualifications. Your IOSH 2001 and NEBOSH 2005 in rows 2 and 3. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, Mr. Todd, Colin Todd, who is an expert in this inquiry, has said in his report that those courses are not particularly relevant to fire safety training. Would you agree with that?
At the time, the NEBOSH course, from my memory, there was not a separate fire safety element. To do the fire safety element, you did the NEBOSH course, and the fire safety was a sanctioned chunk of that course.
Right. Let's just see what he says in his report very, very specifically. If you go to CTA 6011, please, and go to page 50 at the bottom, paragraph 6.14, he says, and this is under the heading, as you can see higher up your screen, training of Mr. Stokes, and he says, accordingly, with regard to the IOSH and NEBOSH qualifications, the extent of training in fire safety that study for the assessments or examinations would involve would not be greatly relevant to this section of my report. However, it would be, and he goes over the page, correct to say that the training would be likely to have provided a basic understanding of the approach to general risk assessment, albeit primarily in the context of health and safety assessments. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, going back to your CV, if we can, please, SAL 709, page 4, page 4, you identify the 2007 Europe Diploma in Fire Safety, about halfway down your screen there. You see that?
Yes.
And that's the Fire Prevention Association. Is that a reference to the course on fire prevention by the Fire Protection Association that you say you completed on the 14th of November 2006?
Sorry about that.
Let me show it to you. CST 3030188, which is your exhibit CST 2/5. That's the certificate, and it's dated, as you can see, 14th of November 2006 in the bottom left-hand corner. You see that?
Correct. Yes.
Is the statement in your CV that referring to the 2007 Europe Diploma in Fire Safety by the FPA a reference to the course covered by this certificate?
It looks like it, yes.
Right. Can we then go back to Mr. Todd's report, please? CTA 6011, page 51, paragraph 6.18, bottom of your screen. He says there in the second sentence, students undertake a 1-week residential course on fire risk assessment, after which they undertake distance learning in 8 topics, each requiring approximately 15 hours of study. Thereafter, the course is completed by undertaking a 3-hour examination. Can you remember whether you studied each of those 8 topics?
I must have done to have passed the course, yes.
Right. Then if we go back to your CV, SAL 709, page 3, looking at page 3 of that, you also say, and this is the I hope now familiar list, between 2005 and 2009, 3/4 of the way down the first box on that page, Fire Prevention Association, FPA, National Occupational Standards, NOS, courses 2 to 12, including fire science and engineering. Just keep that on the screen there for the moment. Can we please go to your second witness statement? The second witness statement at page 45. And we can have that up as well, please, at the same time. CST 3030186, page 45. You can see that on the left-hand side, where we were a moment ago, in the box on your training courses, you've said that you did the NOS courses 2 to 12, just focus on that, fire science and engineering. And now if you cast your eye to the right hand part of the screen, you can see that if you scroll through those 3 pages, 45, 46 and 47, you haven't exhibited certificates for all of the courses 2 to 12, only 2, 3, 4, 4.2, 5 and 10. Now that's, do you accept that, just scrolling through those pages slowly?
Yes, yes.
Does the absence of a certificate mean that you didn't attend one of those courses?
No, I attended them all. The number, so I'm trying to remember back, the numbering of some of the courses was slightly different. I think they changed, so one of the courses might have been 3, but then was called 4.1 or 4.2
Right.
as the courses evolved. But I was a fire officer then, and it was a case of these courses, you started at course 2, and you went on the course as it was dictated to by your superior officer.
I see.
But I did all the courses as they were at that time, NOS 2 to 12.
We don't have certificates for example, 6, 7, 8 or 9 in the list that you've exhibited on the right-hand side of the screen as Appendix 2 to your second witness statement. Is that because you didn't do those courses, or is there another explanation?
Well, I'm just looking quickly on, so there's NS2 4.2.
Yes.
So I think some of the courses numbers, they were numbered initially courses 1 to 12. And then as the courses evolved over the years, they changed. So that's like 4.2 could have been course 6.
I mean, do you remember that happening?
That the numbers changed.
Yes. Well, no, let me put it a different way, rather than trying to force you to grub about in your memory. Can you explain why you haven't exhibited certificates for course 1, 6, 7, 8 or 9?
1 I wouldn't have undertaken.
What about 6, 7, 8 and 9?
Without knowing the titles of those courses, they could have been courses like 4.2 or one of the other courses.
Right. Now, in respect of course NOS 5, let's show you this. Let's look at the certificate for that. CST 3030163. We have that up, please. That has the course date 24th to 28th of April 2006, and its title is NOS 5: Underpinning Knowledge and Risk Assessment of High-Risk Premises. Did that include high-rise blocks of flats?
I can't tell you without looking at the criteria of that course. Sorry.
Right. I don't think you've produced that, have you?
I don't know, sir.
Was there any training, do you remember, on the RRO and its application to high-risk premises as part of that course?
But, so high-risk premises as a definition is not a residential building, might not necessarily be a high-risk premises. A high-risk premises could be a chemical factory.
Yes, all right. Let me break it down. Was there any, as part of this course, was there any training on the RRO?
There would have been, yes.
And as part of that, was there any part of the training relating to high-risk premises?
Without looking at the course notes or something, I couldn't tell you, sir. Sorry.
Right. I mean, the title might give you a clue. The title to the course: Risk Assessment of High-Risk Premises.
Yeah, but high-risk premises is a broad category: a chemical plant, factory, a chemical storage area. Residential buildings are not high risk.
Was there any training on the RRO in relation to the application to high-risk, high-rise residential premises?
In this, I wouldn't know without looking at this. Sorry, sir.
Now, apart from this course, the certificate for which we have in front of us, we haven't found any other evidence that you undertook any training in carrying out fire risk assessments of high-risk premises, including high-rise blocks of flats. Is that right?
They would be covered by other documentation as you went through the. At this time, the sleeping guide was the only real document, and you would have covered that in part of the training courses.
Now, the training in relation to the training on the course in relation to which we have this certificate also included training on fire doors, didn't it?
If you say so, so yes.
Well, that's I'm asking you. CST 3030219. If we can look at that. This is the first page of the of a PowerPoint,
Okay.
delivered by Mike Floyd, an FPA trainer, and it's part, as you can see, of NOS 5, Underpinning Knowledge and Risk Assessment of High-Risk Premises, and the title is Fire Door Repairs and Upgrading Period Buildings. And if you go to, so first of all, just looking at that, do you remember having training under NOS 5 on fire doors?
Yes.
This is a document you've produced. If we turn the page to page 2, you can see that in the middle of the page there's a picture, photograph, door repair and upgrading, and it says, overhead closers should meet BSEN 1154, door should close in less than 30 seconds and latch, and there's a photograph of a door closer with BS 8214 1990 there. Do you remember having training on self-closing doors?
I would remember.
Clearly you did.
Yes.
Yes. I don't remember it specifically, but you accept that you did have it.
Yes.
Yes. You mentioned the sleeping guide a moment ago. Am I to take it at least this course addressed the fire safety guidance available at the time under the sleeping guide, which was published in the June of 2006?
Yes.
Yes.
I can't remember the dates if you say so, yes.
Now, let's look at the NOS 3 course then. This you identify at CST 3030186, page 45, the first page of your Appendix 6, which sets out the certificates we've seen before. Let's look at page 45, CST 3030186, page 45. Last entry on that page there, Fire Protection Association Certificate, NOS 3, evaluate design submissions against approved document B, endorsed by the Confederation of Fire Protection Associations Europe. In that course, we've seen some of the training materials that you have given us. First, can we look at CST 3030199? Let's have that up. This is external fire spread, so we can take it that your NOS 3 training included training on external fire spread, yes?
Correct.
And if you go, please, in that document to page 15, you can see that on page 15, starting below the heading rain screen cladding, there's a lengthy chunk of text which refers to essentially the contents of approved document B. In the second paragraph there, you've got a reference to the provisions of diagram 40 in the first sentence for the outer cladding, and then insulation for the external walls of a building over 18 metres in height should be composed of materials of limited combustibility, with the exception for masonry cavity walls, and then the reference at the bottom there to BR 135, at that stage still in its first edition, 1988. Although I question that, actually. That's an interesting question. Did you know that the second edition came out in 2003?
No.
No. See, this course may be a little bit out of date. Never mind. I don't expect that's something that you were trained on. But you can see that you got training on at least those topics, yes?
Yes.
If you go to page 16, you can see that you actually got training on what was then, or what is said then to have been diagram 40. Did you pay attention to this bit of the course?
Yes.
Yes. And you've got the key to external wall surface classification. You've got class 0 there in the middle box on the right-hand side, and then underneath that, it's not quite on your screen yet, you can see the notes, national classifications. If we could just scroll up, thank you. Note 1, national classifications do not automatically equate with the equivalent European classifications, therefore products cannot typically assume a European class unless they have been tested accordingly. And then it says underneath that, diagram 40 is fairly self-explanatory as long as it's remembered that it's only talking about the combustibility of the exterior wall and has nothing to do with fire protection, which is dealt with in section 14. Was this all rocket science to you, or did you understand it at the time, do you think?
I would have understood it. This is how you compare A building construction to ADB. Yes.
And if you go on then, please, to another module of the NOS 3 course, CST 3030200, This is access and facilities for the fire service. And if we go to page 15 in that, please, do you remember seeing this page, insulating core panels, with a rather dramatic photograph based on the historic experience of a fire at Sun Valley Poultry, in which 2 firefighters died. So bringing to your attention the need for fire safety with sandwich panels. Also CST 3030201, which is about insulating core panels itself. So you actually had a whole section on insulating core panels. Do you remember that part of the training?
Not per se every part of it, but yes, I remember the training.
No, well, let's just focus on page 6 if we go into that, please. You can see there, fire behaviour of insulating core panels used for internal structures, but then it goes on underneath the photograph to say, insulating core panel systems are used for external cladding as well as for internal structures. Do you remember that?
Yes.
You do. And if you look at page 6, you can see in the text above the photograph, and I'm summarising the text there, that insulating core panels promote rapid fire spread. You see that?
Yes.
Primarily one of speed.
This means that the officer in charge must react quickly.
Indeed.
Remember, I'm doing this as a fire safety officer and building control officer, not as an operational fire officer.
Yes, but you are aware of the risk to buildings presented by insulating core panels forming part of external cladding systems?
Yes.
Yes. Did you understand from your training on these topics that I've shown you so far that if there was rapid external fire spread, it could or would perhaps compromise compartmentation of a building?
Correct. Yes.
Yes. How did you understand that training on external cladding would apply to your practice as a fire safety officer and then a fire risk assessor?
So can you say again?
Yes. Did you get any sense of how the training on external facades and the use of, for example, insulating core panel systems in external cladding was relevant to your work as a fire risk assessor?
Very relevant.
In what way?
Because the external facade of a building actually breaches or goes up the complete outside of the building. Therefore, it would breach any compartmentation internally.
Can we look at your first witness statement, please, page 49? And at paragraph 145, under the FSO, you say this: there has been some suggestion that the scope of the FSO should be deemed to require fire risk assessors to consider the external facade of a building rather than just the common parts, albeit so far as I'm aware, no evidence has been adduced to date to substantiate such an interpretation. And then at paragraph 146, you say, I have never understood this to be the case, nor was this put to me in my training on FRAs, which I received from Colin Todd, who ran the Northern Ireland Fire Safety Panel FRA training that I attended, as referred to at paragraphs 11 and 24, Roman 2. And then you go on to say, furthermore, from my experience, both in the fire service and as a fire risk assessor, neither is this the understanding of the profession nor common practice. In addition, I do not believe the LGA guidance suggests that the external walls are part of the common parts of a building for the purposes of the FSO FRA. Neither do any of the types of FRA identified in that document suggest that the external walls are common parts. Looking at the training that you got under NOS 3 that we've been studying, the external wall panels, diagram 40, insulation being of limited combustibility, the dangers of sandwich panels and the use of external cladding, I'm summarising them, is it really true to say that you'd never understood it to be the case that the external facade of a building fell within the scope of the FSO?
What you've just said is correct. The fire safety order is to do with in residential buildings is to do with the common parts or parts in common. The external facade of a residential building falls outside of the scope of the fire safety order.
So what was the purpose of being trained on the external facade of a building then?
The document you showed me in the course before was to do with building control. So I had a knowledge that external facades, but it was a complete, that's a building control, building regulations course. This is the fire safety order, undertaking a risk assessment of the common parts of a residential building. The external facade falls outside, but I have knowledge of how dangerous the external facades can be, and I brought that up in my risk assessment.
Yes, I see. Well, we'll come back to the question of the scope of the RRO perhaps in due course. After you undertook training on external fire spread, rain screen cladding, insulation and sandwich panels or insulating core panels in March 2006, as we've seen from the NOS 3 in particular, did you ever undertake any further training on those subjects?
Off the top of my head, I can't give you specifics, but there would have been training because the NO3, the two fire persons, so it was two. So yes, there would have been other training because there is, first female firefighter to die, Fleur, I think her name was. She died in a co-op store, and the insulated panel, sandwich paneling had an effect in there. So yes, it would have come up in training elsewhere.
Right. During the course of your practice as a fire risk assessor, were you aware of other national and international cladding fires?
Yes.
You were. For example, the fires in the UAE in 2012?
Yes.
You were.
So is that the torch? Is it
those were in 2015, in fact.
Sorry.
But yes, torch as well. You were aware of that, I assume. And were you aware of cladding fires in Europe, for example, in Roubaix in France?
Yes.
You were. Were you aware of the dangers of ACM polyethylene cord panels?
Yes.
When did you first become aware, do you think, of the dangers of ACM polyethylene cord panels?
Well, I wouldn't have known it maybe as ACM, but I would have known it as insulated core paneling.
Right. That's not quite the same thing, in fact, is it?
Well, there was a fire in Scotland.
Irvine, is that?
Yes. Late 1990s, 80s, 1990s.
Or Garnet Court. There are two.
Sorry, I can't.
Right. 1999?
Yes.
Right. That's Garnet Court.
Okay, sorry, sir.
I see. And that was, I see, was it that fire that brought the dangers of rain screen cladding to your attention?
Well, as a fire officer, as fire safety, you would have, these are part of training courses that would have been run.
Right.
Or information on training courses.
How did you generally keep yourself up to date with developments in the fire safety industry?
What, as a fire officer or afterwards?
After 2010, let's pick a date.
Going to exhibitions, looking at the news, keeping up to date by different. CPD is one method or one group of courses I go on. It twice, 3 times a year. You go to a building around the country. They run 3, 4, 5 different topics. You get to pick which ones you want to go to. 2 different rooms, so you can pick. I still get today even emails from them saying these are the courses. Go to exhibitions, fire exhibitions, things like that. Keeping up to date with national news, and just talking to other fire risk assessors.
Now, Appendix 1 to your second statement has a list of courses and events you attended, but none of those were on external fire spread or cladding. Is that right?
Without looking at that course, I can't say.
Well, let's go there again then, please. Appendix 1 to your statement is at CST 3030186, page 45. just scroll down those over that page and the next 2 pages. Just look at those, if you would. Page 45, now 46. Cast your eye down that, and then page 47, cast your eye down that. Is there anything you see there which you can identify for us as comprising a course or an event on external fire spread or cladding?
Car park then.
Okay.
No.
No. Is there a reason why you didn't seek out further training on that particular risk in order to keep your knowledge up to date?
I kept up to date by downloading information and doing self CPD
Specifically on external fire spread and cladding?
on loads of different topics.
Right. Did that include, you say loads of different topics, is that a yes, including external fire spread or cladding, or loads of different topics not including external fire spread or cladding?
Both.
Well, it can't be both.
Well, I would look at anything that was A, flavour of the month, or B, that I thought was relevant. So,
right.
For instance, one item that was coming up while I was still undertaking fire risk assessments is electric cars, batteries, lithium batteries. That's a very big topic at the moment.
Yes.
But cladding, as there were different fires around, especially in Middle East, I would keep up to date.
Right. So you mentioned the torch earlier. When you saw that fire in 2015, did you undertake any flavour of the month style training as a result of that? Did you go in? Did you examine it?
I'm just trying to remember. Where I was in Dubai. Is this the one in Dubai?
Yes.
Yes, I actually went to the building.
You went to the building?
I was on holiday there, and we actually went past that building, I think.
Yes, I can
So
imagine.
I've seen
how a fire risk assessor on holiday in Dubai might want to do that. So you actually went to the building?
Well, I saw it from the water, yes, I think.
Right. Did you discover at that time what the rain screen panels were comprised of?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember, no, sir.
Right. Must have been quite a striking event for you.
It's black all over on the outside, yes.
Yeah. And so, just to be clear, you were aware at that time, this is 2015, that this was a cladding fire?
Yes.
Yes.
Can I just ask, did you actually see the fire or just the aftermath?
Just the aftermath.
Yeah. Now, in respect of training about fire safety and disabled persons, we can see that you can, well, we'll have it up anyway, CST 3030155, please. This is an NOS course number 4, and it's a course entitled Firefighting Lifts, Atrium Buildings and Means of Escape for the Disabled, and the date is 27th June 2005. You exhibited that. I think it's also right that at some point you completed a CPD seminar on fire safety for deaf and hard of hearing people, the law and the solutions.
Correct.
Yes. Do you remember when roughly you undertook that course?
Without looking at the document I provided you, knows.
No. Well, we haven't got a document. You've just got your identification of it. You don't know how many hours of CPD it covered offhand, or even on hand.
I think it was all day, because if it's the course on the day I'm thinking of, it was held at football ground, Arsenal football ground, and there was a presentation on escape from the Twin Towers.
Right.
Because it was relevant, because the disabled people on the staircase, right, how they were coping, etc.
Right. If we go to Appendix 1 of your statement, please, and look at page 49. So CST 3030. There it is. Thank you. You can see there, higher up that page, that on the 29th of November 2011, thank you, 49, 22nd item down, 29th of November 2011, you attended a CPD day, Certificate of Attendance at the Fire Industries Association Fire Risk Assessor, PEEPS, issued by the Fire Industry Association. You see that?
Yes.
That dealt, I'm assuming, is this right, with personal emergency evacuation plans, didn't it?
Yes.
Yes. And you have a certificate for that. I'll just give you the reference. It's CST 3030169. There's no need to turn it up. Was that the extent of your training on disabled persons and escape and PEEPS?
I did other CPD. Part of, as a fire officer, I undertook some courses, especially evacuations from hospitals. At one point, I was actually a liaison officer for some new build hospitals in Oxford.
Right.
So part of that is how do you get disabled people or people in ICT wards out.
Right.
So I was quite familiar with this evacuation of people that have got, limited control of their functions or they're sedated.
On the subject of PEEPS, do you remember whether during this training day there was any training which included preparing PEEPS for residents of high-rise residential blocks?
I can't tell you, no.
Looking at the date of this CPD day, 29th of November 2011, do you remember whether the training included training on the then just published LGA guidance?
I would imagine it would have done,
Right.
but I can't tell you for definite.
Do you remember being taught anything one way or the other about whether you needed to prepare PEEPS for residents of high-rise residential blocks?
The answer is yes. That would have been covered on that course. I would have
Right.
thought.
Do you remember what was the, I hate the word, but let me use it, what was the takeaway message in that respect?
It's up to the responsible person has to undertake a PEEPS if one is needed or required for that person.
Right. Thank you. Now, was that in 2011? Was that the last training you did on PEEPS, or were there others after 2011?
There would have been others, but it would have been CPD.
So self-assessment. Yes. Right. Can we go to back to Appendix 1? Well, stick with Appendix 1 and stick with this page. You can see that on the top row, 7th of October 2011, Certificate of Attendance at the Fire Industry Association's Fire Risk Assessor Update CPD Day. There, what did that involve?
Sorry, I again can't
Right.
remember that far back, sorry.
And then if you look a little bit down, you can see 12th July 2012, Certificate of Attendance at the Fire Industry Association's Fire Risk Assessor, the Law CPD Day. What did that involve?
From memory, it was as how our prosecutions evolving at that time.
Prosecutions under the RRO?
Yes.
Any other legislation?
Again, without looking at any course notes or anything, I can't tell you, sorry.
But you're clear about the RRO at any rate?
Yes, well, that's why I would have gone on the day.
Yeah, exactly, because that's the primary piece of legislation relevant to
yes,
your
and how
job.
apologies, sorry, I'm talking over you. Yes, how it would affect risk assessors. I'm just trying to remember, is this roughly the time that the risk assessor was prosecuted, 2012?
Well, you would have to tell me the answer.
Sorry, I can't remember the date.
Right. Do you remember whether that training course it covered fire safety matters arising from the Lakanal house fire in 2009?
I was going to say yes, if it was a topic on the discussion at that point, it would have covered that.
Right. Now, if you go to your second witness statement, please, page 8, let's look together at paragraph 25 point Roman 6. You say, attending assorted training provided by C.S. Todd and Associates, and then you identify that, and then you say, in particular, I recall attending a talk on the then new LGA, Fire Safety and Purpose-Built Blocks of Flats Guide 2012, for which I have a document handout containing the slides presented at that talk. This is exhibited at CSS 2/20, and it's at CST 3030160. Can we just have that up, please? You have the first page there, one-day course, CS Todd, Fire Safety and Purpose-Built Blocks of Flats. And if you go to the second page, we can see that it has training dates for 2013, which gives you a rough idea of the timing of this document, or that course. And then if you go to page 10 of the handout, we can see that you received some further training on what is called disabled evacuation. If you look at the box at the top of your screen
Yes.
on the left, yes? And in that box, it refers to personal emergency evacuation plans, the fourth bullet out of 5, yes? Can you remember what you were taught about PEEPs?
Not accurately, no. It was a training course a long time ago.
Right.
But it would have covered a PEEPs, what's involved, how there's government has a document that lays out, it's one of the suite of documents under risk assessment. So I'm going to guess it covers most of the information in that. Is the person capable of getting to a door, capable of hearing, seeing, movement? What's their mobility?
Yes. Do you remember being told on this course that a fire risk assessor did not have to worry about PEEPs because they weren't required for residents of high-rise residential blocks?
I doubt if that would have been said, sir.
Now, can I ask you to go to page 36 in this document, please? Page 36. Again, we have disabled evacuation, and again, personal emergency evacuation. So this looks like it was gone into in quite some detail. You see that?
Yes.
Now, you also see in that box, the last bullet point, information box. What were you taught about that? Do you remember?
So this is 2011, isn't it, sir? Sorry, 12, something like that. These information boxes were predominantly for, I'm going to get, at this time, would have been for residential care homes or something along those lines.
Right. And if we look at page 11, and I'll show you a number of pages before I ask you the question. First, page 11, see on the at the top of in the top box, building regulations, and then the second bullet point there is classic contraventions are internal doors and flat entrance doors. Page 30. You can see on page 30 also reference to doors under the middle box, flats, internal MOE, common issues, and then the third bullet point, self-closing devices removed / disabled. So you were clearly trained on that, yes?
Correct.
And in fact, that was at that time. Do you remember quite a prominent or prominently expressed part of the LGA guidance? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And then at page 39 to 41. If you look at 39, you can see fire-resisting doors. You see the bottom box, and it says, option based on risk assessment, accept original notional fire door, upgrade the door, upgraded strips and seals, replace with FD30S door and frame, and then there's handwriting just to the right of that, is not an FD30S door, exclamation mark, will improve, but exactly how, something, no one knows. Is that your handwriting?
No,
It isn't. Right, okay. So you can't help me decipher it. Either way, do you recall being trained that when you're replacing a fire-resisting door, one of the options is to replace it with FD30S?
Yes.
Yes. And the S stands for?
Smoke seal.
Smoke
Cold,
seal.
cold smoke
Cold
seal.
smoke seal, yes. And if you go to page 30, page 17 of this document. Well, no, let's turn the page. I'm so sorry. To stick with this section for the moment. If you turn to page 40, fire-resisting doors, top box, left-hand side, third bullet point, fitted with self-closing device, rising butt hinges should be changed. That was clear to you, wasn't it?
Yes.
That the old-fashioned rising butt hinges should now be replaced with self-closing devices. And there were other issues as well, such as the glazing, letterbox, spy hole, and cat flap. And then if you go to page 41, top box, left-hand side, fire-resisting doors, second bullet point down, 5 to 6 stories, upgraded 30-minute doors, and then third bullet, over 6 stories, FD30S doors and frames. So you had training on that.
Yes.
Yes. Page 17, please. Back, earlier on in this document shows that you had training, top left-hand box, on PAS 79 and the 9 steps there. Was that the 12th? Was that the October 2012 edition of PAS 79, or was it still the 2007 edition? Do you remember?
I have no idea. So
Right. You also, if you go to page 18, you also see there that you had training on the competence standard for fire risk assessors. You can see that there in all boxes, as well as UCAS accreditation. And you look at the bottom of that, you can see that there's a new competency criteria for fire risk assessors. And then page 24 in this document, we can see that you also had training on fire spread. Bottom left-hand side, first bullet point, the potential for fire spread in both the common parts and within flats should be considered. And the top box, existing blocks, the risk increases with the height, size and numbers of flats in a block. And 6 stories and above should be 60 minutes. So you had training on that as well.
Yes.
Did that training include smoke spread as well as fire spread? Do you remember?
Well, I would have thought it would have done.
Yes.
If you have fire spread, would be smoke precedes fire.
Now, can we go to your second witness statement, page 7, paragraph 25, Roman 5, please? You can see there that you say that you attended annual fire lectures given by the Worshipful Company of Firefighters. One of these lectures was titled The Fire Lecture 2014, High Rise, Not High Risk, and included certain aspects of firefighting in high-rise buildings as well as many firefighting-related matters. I exhibit a copy of the programme in my notes, which record, and I'll just read it off your statement, timber frame is stay put appropriate, FRA must be building specific, breaching of compartments during refurbishment work, FRAs need to be better. And if we go to your notes, let's just look at those. CST 3030142, page 5, please. These are your notes.
Correct.
And you can see Feb 2014 high-risk generic risk assessment. Was that a reference to the February 2014 GRE 3.2?
I would have, looks like it, yes.
GRA 3.2, published by the DCLG at that stage, right.
Yeah.
And then timber frame is stay put appropriate. And then you've set out, well, rather, there is the manuscript which you've transliterated in your statement.
Yes.
These are your notes. Who was the speaker? Do you know? Sorry, I should ask the question first. Are you recording what was said during the course of a lecture?
Yes.
Right. Who was the speaker? Do you know?
London Fire Brigade organised it, Worshipful Company of Firefighters, and the speaker was from Hong Kong, and I cannot pronounce his name or cannot even think of his name.
Was it? Well, we can see the speakers, in fact, on page 2, so that may help you. And One of the speakers is Jones Young.
Yes.
Right. Was that him?
So he was the person from Hong Kong, Chief Fire Officer. He was giving a very good talk because of the way the buildings, Hong Kong has a lot of high-rise buildings. And the speakers throughout, as you can see there, the notes, I would have taken those notes as they spoke.
Now, you've written in your notes, we'll just go back to page 5 of this document, FRAs need to be better. What was it about FRAs that needed to be better? Do you remember?
Not specifically. No, not.
Can we take it then that from May 14, and I've just marked that point as a
Yes.
date, you were aware that there was a risk that refurbishment work might present a risk to compartmentation? Looking at everything we've looked at.
Knew that before.
Yes. Right. As a result of this lecture in May 2014, you didn't change anything in your practice, or did you?
It's a long time ago, sir, to actually ask to remember that. What would I have changed? It was it highlights the specific points. The one that on here, the one I've noted, is timber framed. It's
right.
Construction of buildings plays an important part, especially high-rise residential. If you've got concrete floors, concrete walls around the flats, and the compartmentation line flat to common part is 6 inches of poured concrete, and its ability to withstand fire is higher than a timber framed building constructed today, where the only concrete compartment shaft in the building is the staircases, where in older constructed buildings it was the staircase was concrete, the floors were concrete, the walls of the flats onto the lift lobby area corridors were concrete, where now they're just stud partitioning.
Mr. Chairman, we're going to change topics now, and it may be convenient to do so. I won't finish the topic before the last moment.
Would it be better to stop now?
Probably would be, yes.
Yes, all right. Well, Mr. Stokes, as you were told earlier, we have a break during the morning and the afternoon, so we'll take a break now. We'll resume at 11:30, please. And I'm going to say to you on this occasion, and probably every other occasion you leave the room, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it while you're out of the room.
Okay.
All right? Thank you very much. You go to the usher then, please. Right, 11:30 then, please. Would you ask Mr. Stokes to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Stokes.
Thank you.
Okay, ready to carry on?
So,
Good, thank you very much. Yes, Mr.
Thank you,
Willis?
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stokes, I'd like to turn to the subject of your fire risk assessment work when you were at Salvas, please. Now, you started work for Salvas on the 24th of September 2009. And if you go, please, to your first witness statement, please, page 6, paragraph 14, you say that you were taken on as a subcontractor. Just look at it there. That's what you say. You say it was as a subcontractor to Salvas that I first became aware of the tower. That's Grenfell Tower, I'm assuming.
yes.
But if we look, please, at SAL 702, I want to show you what Mr. Furness, Andrew Furness, says. He was the director of Salvas Consulting, and if you look at the third paragraph of this document, dated August 2019, which he has provided to the inquiry, he says this: no contract with CS Stokes and Associates was ever discussed and agreed, as Carl Stokes was employed personally and he worked as a member of the Salvas team, not as a subcontractor, underlined. Is Mr. Furness wrong?
My understanding was I was a subcontractor.
Look at the paragraph above it. Following a meeting with Carl Stokes, an offer of employment was made by letter, copy provided. This offer was accepted and he provided a P45 new employer form to Salvas, showing the leaving date from his last employer as being 24th of September 2009, this also being the date he commenced work for Salvas Consulting Limited. Did you provide a P45 new employer form to Salvas, as Mr. Furness says?
I must have done, if that's what he said.
Right. Once you joined Salvas, did you receive any training?
None springs to mind.
Who did you report to?
The lady in the office, sorry, I think it was his other half, Kate. And then I worked with a former colleague of mine who I worked in the fire service with.
So you don't remember the name of your line manager when you were at Salvas?
Well, if I needed anything, I would speak to, the lady in the office, Kate, or who was Andy Furness's wife, I believe. And I don't think I could ever rang up Andy per se and said I talked to him. But I would talk to my colleague who I used to work with.
Who's that?
A person called Steve Wayne.
Steve Wade.
Wayne.
I've seen the name. We'll come back to that maybe in due course. Looking at the middle of the page here, or at the foot of the page, foot of the screen in your case, all members of the Salvas team receive considerable support from other members of the risk assessment team, the MD and support staff. Salvas Consulting Limited operates a quality control process for both technical and administrative areas, and sign-off for each assessment following appropriate levels of revision where required is undertaken by the Managing Director. And then he goes on to say, this process took place for all fire risk assessments completed for the KCTMO, please see revision number on Grenfell Tower fire risk assessment, and emails exchanged between Andrew Furness and Carl Stokes are attached. Is what he says there correct?
Yes, so if I undertook the work and then he reviewed and then came back.
Right, so your work would be peer-reviewed by Andrew Furness, would it?
Yes.
And what other support did you receive while you were at Salvas?
In training-wise, this may have been how to fill their form in electronically.
Do you recall the quality control process governing fire risk assessments in place at Salvas at the time?
The quality control would be peer reviewed by Andy Salvas himself.
Right.
Furness himself.
It's right, is it, that once you left Salvas, and were awarded the fire risk assessment contract by the TMO initially for the medium risk properties, you no longer had access to Salvas's support system, guidance and quality control.
As far as I'm aware, yes.
Yes.
Correct.
So when you left Salvas and started up on your own, what support or peer review or quality control systems did you have in place?
I was sole trader, so
Yes.
I would myself. That was it.
So the answer to my question is none, I think.
None. Yes.
Right. When you worked for Salvas, how many fire risk assessments did you carry out, do you think? I know it's difficult to be accurate, but...
Again, I would not know. Sorry.
Right. But was it tens or hundreds?
Tens.
Right. And how many of those, do you recall, roughly, were on high-rise residential buildings?
20, 30, something like that. I'm just trying to think. It would be RBKC TMO.
Yes. Did you attend any of the meetings between Salvas, the TMO, and the London Fire Brigade?
No.
Were you told anything about what had been discussed and agreed in meetings between Salvas, the TMO, and the LFB?
I would have been, but I can't remember in that information. It was never a sit-down meeting.
Right. Did you ever look at the minutes? Were you ever shown the minutes or notes of those meetings?
Nothing, no.
Now, in your first witness statement at page 6, at paragraph 15, you say this. If we can have that, please. You say, the first time I visited the tower was on 30th of September 2009 for the purposes of carrying out an FRA, 2009 FRA. As well as visiting the tower, I was also provided with various information by the KCTMO, and then you give some examples. For my first involvement with the tower, it was apparent that stay put was the evacuation strategy in place for the residential floors, and that the commercial premises had a fire alarm stroke evacuation as a strategy, which is not unusual for premises of this sort. And you've exhibited 2 spreadsheets there, and you've given the references. Let's just have them up. CST 403121, which is a different reference but the same document, and also CST 403124. That's 3121. Can you explain what that was?
This looks to me to be the TMO's property reference, building reference. So house number, street, postcode, and the estate it's on.
Yes, and then various details for each property.
Yes.
And what about the CST 403124? If you can have that up, please. What was that?
To me, that looks like a documentation for fire alarm systems within the flats.
Right. Now, you were working for Salvas at the time these documents were given to you. Were you given any other information about the tower, do you think, other than spreadsheets of this kind?
So I'm trying to remember. Documentation on the previous one, it had systems within it. I would have asked for when they were last tested and serviced and stuff like that. Whether that would have come through TMO or Salvas, I can't remember.
Right. And how would that information come to you? Would it come by email or?
Email.
Right. Did you see any previous risk assessments that had been completed for Grenfell Tower specifically?
No.
Did you ask for them? When you did your 2009 risk assessment?
I would have asked for that. Yes.
Right. And what were you told?
I can't remember. But if I hadn't been given them, that means they weren't available, or Salvas, they had the meetings.
Before your visit, what instructions were you given regarding the substance of the FRA that you were to carry out?
Residential areas of the tower.
Right. And what instructions were you given about inspecting flat entrance doors specifically? Do you remember?
Can't remember
Right.
specifically.
Well, let's just look at a document, SAL 6040, please. This is a note of a briefing meeting. If we just look at page 1 of that, please, to start with. It's a briefing meeting of the 7th of September 2009. You were not present. Janice Ray was, together with Andrew Furness and Steve Wayne, the gentleman that you referred to just earlier, both of Salvas. And if you look a little bit lower down the page, lower down on the screen, underneath project objectives and scope of work, 2.1, fire risk assessments, FRAs and reviews, and it says, the FRA and FRA reviews will include an individual examination of each fire door, including whether it operates correctly. That's in quotation marks. Steve sought clarification of what this would mean practically in terms of quantity of flat entrance doors to be assessed. Janice advised that she expected a random sample of doors to be inspected and assessed. Specifically, where many doors were clearly identical, several should be inspected, and where there was a wide range of door types, it would be helpful to inspect as many of the different types as possible, and where possible, comment on the fire safety of all. Do you recall being told by Steve Wayne or perhaps Janice Ray that a random sample of flat entrance doors had to be inspected and assessed when it came to you doing your FRA at Grenfell Tower at the end of that month?
Specifically, no. But I would have undertaken a random sample because otherwise I wouldn't have known what the doors were, how they were constructed.
Now, can we go to your first statement, please? Page 18, paragraph 54. This is underneath the heading, Process of Carrying Out FRAs. And you say there, the process by which I carried out the various FRAs for the tower varied slightly by virtue of the circumstances, i.e. the 2009 FRA was the first FRA I undertook for the tower and thus required further investigation, such as an initial familiarisation with the tower, so as to understand its layout and key features. How did you go about carrying out the inspection for the FRA?
Starting at the top and working my way down,
Right.
floor by floor.
Floor by floor. And how long did it last, do you think?
4 or 5 hours, 4 hours.
Right. Would it have included knocking on flats to gain entry to inspect the flat entrance doors?
If it was, yes.
You did do that, did you?
Yes.
What differed between your visit on the 30th of September 2009 for that first FRA of Grenfell Tower and any future visits to the tower that you later undertook?
Well, follow-up visits, I would have known the layout of the building after that.
Right.
But the first time is to actually find your way around the building, the layout, and more importantly, where all the services and risers, etc. So,
Did you make any notes of that visit?
I would have done, yes.
Do you know where they are now?
Probably destroyed.
Right. You say probably destroyed. What was your document destruction policy, so far as you had one, when you were operating as a sole trader after 2010?
If I was to do a follow-up, I would take documents, the risk significant findings with me from the last one. Anything, once I'd done the new one, the other documents would be destroyed.
Right. Did you have a policy of destroying documents after a period of time?
Not a specific period of time. To be honest, once the pile got too big, it was cold from the bottom upwards.
Right. Where did you work from, generally?
Home.
Home. Did you have a study at home? An office
Yes.
at home? Right. And your documents would be kept there, would they?
Yes.
Can we go, please, to CST 403128? This is the fire risk assessment dated 30th of September 2009 for Grenfell Tower. You can see that from page 1 of this document. Can we go to page 5, please, within it? And on page 5, you can see under general information at the very top, it says landlord name, RBKC, and then responsible person, chief executive of RBKC, responsible person, contact on site, tenant management organisation, warden, persons consulted during assessment, Janice Ray. Just in relation to who was the responsible person, looking at that, it tends to suggest that both RBKC and the TMO were the responsible persons. Is that how you saw it?
This would have been the information I would have been given to put down as responsible person.
I see.
After the meetings that others had.
Did you question that?
I can't say definitively no.
Right. Was it always your view thereafter that both RBKC and the TMO were responsible persons for the purposes of the RRO?
Yes.
Now, looking at the referenced persons consulted during assessment, Ms. Janice Ray of the TMO, what did that consultation involve? Do you remember?
Information on the building. I would have asked for certificates, lift, maintenance records, fire, dry risers,
Right.
anything like that.
Did you have a meeting with her, or did you communicate with her by email or telephone?
I'm going to say at this time, everything went through Salvas's office.
Right. But nonetheless, did you have a meeting with her where she gave you the information, or did she send it all by email?
I'm going to say it comes through Salvas's office.
By email.
I would have thought so.
Right. And at the bottom of the page, you can see, bottom left-hand corner, do you see it says FIRE, or Fire Salpt 1 Rev 4, Grenfell Tower. Does that tell us that this went through 4 revisions before being finalised?
That's what it looks like, yeah.
Yes. Can you remember why this went through 4 revisions?
There was backwards and forwards because of layout and information required in each part.
Backwards and forwards between whom?
Myself and Andy Finesse.
Right. So does that tell us that there was, in effect, a quality control process under which this FRA was reviewed? In fact, at least twice.
Yes.
And is it fair to say that it would not, or did not, go out to the TMO as the client unless and until Andrew Furness was happy with it?
Correct.
Now, we'll come back to this document repeatedly during your evidence, but I'm going to leave this one there for the moment and ask you about the tender that you did for the TMO work. You remember that in 2010 you submitted a tender to the TMO, didn't you?
Yes.
And as part of that exercise, can we go to CST 705, please? As part of that exercise, is it right that you were sent this document? This is a consultant's brief, fire risk assessments, medium risk programme, July 2010. Yes?
Yes.
And do you agree that this document set out the requirements and standards to be provided when carrying out FRA work for the TMO under its medium risk programme?
Yes.
Now, if we go to page 3, please, to start with, you can see paragraph 1.1. This brief specifies the requirements for FRAs in the communal areas of the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, the council's housing stock. These properties are managed by the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea Tenant Management Organisation Limited, the TMO. This brief provides general information relevant to the Commission and details the service requirements and standards to be provided. So you understood that this document was essentially the cornerstone of what you were going to do if you got the job.
Yes.
Yes. Now, if you go to page 25 in that document, please, page 25, halfway down the page, you can see that there is a heading, Quotation Submissions, section 7, and under section 7.1D, little Roman 3, at the bottom of your screen, bottom of the page, it says, details of professional qualifications, in particular fire risk assessment qualifications and experience of the project leader and proposed team members who will carry out the assessments. Now, when you saw that, presumably you understood what it was you had to provide, yes?
Yes.
Yes. And presumably you understood that was so that the TMO could make a proper and fully informed selection of the professional who was going to carry out this programme.
Yes.
Yes. Now, we've got a pack of certificates that you sent to the TMO, and those are at TMO 00880581. TMO 00880581. Let's just look at those. We can scroll through them. Just have a look and see what that is. That is a certificate of public liability and products liability insurance with all the details redacted, and it continues in that vein and down to page 6, for example, which is where the certificates begin. And we've seen one or two of these before. Page 6, page 7 is about shaft ventilation. Page 8, certificate of completion of an FIA training course. Page 9, FIA training course, etc., etc. Is it right that although you sent them this pack of certificates, you sent them no details of your fire risk assessment qualifications and experience?
That'd be correct, yes.
Yes. Now, if you go to your first witness statement, please, at paragraph 50, you say there that you also provided a sample fire risk assessment, and you've exhibited that. If we look at that, please, that's at CST 403071. And there it is. It's for 41 High Street, W10. Did you provide that to the TMO as part of the tender?
Yes.
Yeah. And was that in advance of your interview?
I can't remember whether it was in advance. It would have, if you're telling me I had to provide this beforehand, the answer is yes.
You did. Looking at page 3, if we can, please, we see a statement here of the qualifications that you say you had. And it's under the heading Assessment Completed By, and I'll just read it to you. Mr. C. Stokes, ACI ARB, FPA DIP FP Europe, Fire Eng FPA, NEBOSH, FIA-BS 5839 System Designer, Competent Engineer BS 5266, IFE Assessor Stroke Auditor FSO, 19 years fire safety experience with local fire authority in enforcement and auditing roles, 3 years as an independent fire risk assessor, member of the construction industry CPD certification service, professional indemnity insurance cover provided by Hiscox, enhanced CRB checked. So that statement of qualifications, is this right, was to assist you in your application to become the TMO's fire risk assessor for the medium risk program?
Yes.
Yes. Now, I want to look at those qualifications in a little bit of detail. But before I do you accept that that paragraph is mirrored across all of the fire risk assessments that you ever did for the TMO?
It would have been updated, but yes.
Yeah, updated in certain respects, but certainly, but otherwise mirrored. If you look at, if you look at the post-nominals, were they included to lead the reader to think that you had these qualifications and professional body memberships?
In hindsight, looking at this could have been worded a lot better. I had to look up what the word post-nominals actually meant. These were designed to show courses and competence and training courses passed as required by the fire safety order.
Yes, can you just answer my question? Were they included, the post-nominals means the letters after your name.
Okay.
All right. Do you agree that you included those so as to lead the reader to think that you had the formal qualifications and professional body membership set out here?
Correct, that's what they are there for.
And is it fair to say that you wanted to create that impression in order to improve your prospects of winning the tender?
They are my courses I have attended and exams I have passed to get those courses.
Now, let's just look at the first one. ACI ARB. That indicates that you're an associate of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators.
Correct.
That has no bearing on your role as a fire risk assessor, does it?
Yes, I think it does, because you have to negotiate between builders, the client, there's the risk assessor, find out information on the building. So I think it does have a bearing on risk assessment.
Right. In your second witness statement, let's go to that, page 5, paragraph 21B. You deal here with the next post-nominal, Fire Eng FPA, that I've just shown you. And at page 5, paragraph 21B, you say, this designation refers to the various NOS courses I took, the certificates for which are appended at Appendix 1, and we've seen those. Would you agree that, in fact, the post-nominal Fire Eng FPA doesn't actually exist?
It is the course NOS 11 and 12?
Yes, but the post-nominal Fire Eng FPA is not actually, isn't actually a post-nominal. It's not like...
I never wanted to be a post-nominal, as they were courses attended. I could have worded it a lot better by saying the following courses.
Right. Yes, I mean, neither the post-nominal nor the surrounding text make any mention of the NOS courses. Do they?
No.
No. Instead, you opted to use something called Fire Eng FPA, which is a post-nominal which doesn't exist.
I don't say so. They were never meant to be post-nominals. They were meant to be qualifications, training and experience as required by the fire safety order. Fire Engineer FPA is a NOS course, which is 11 and 12.
You're not a qualified fire engineer,
No.
are you? No. But using Fire Eng FPA tends to suggest that you might be. Somebody who didn't know anything about it might be led to think that you were a qualified fire engineer.
And I would have, if they would ever asked me, I'd have told them I wasn't.
Yes, but those who didn't ask you would have been left with that uncorrected impression, wouldn't they?
In hindsight, sir, I see where you're coming from.
Well, do you agree?
Yes.
Yes. Similarly, looking at the next one, NEBOSH, we can stick with this page. No, sorry, I'm so sorry. Let's go back to the. Let's go back, please, to the fire risk assessment that you sent. It's page 3 of CST 403071. NEBOSH. And then after that, FIA BS 5839, System Designer, Competent Engineer BS 5266. Those aren't post-nominals recognised by any professional body, are they?
Their courses attended.
Yes, but they're not post-nominals recognised by any professional body,
No.
are they? No. And the certificates for those courses don't give you any authority to use those post-nominals, do they?
They're industry standard courses.
But they don't give you any authority to use those post-nominals, do
No.
they? No. Going back, let's keep this on the screen if we can, please, and go to paragraph 21C of your second witness statement at page 5. NEBOSH itself second witness statement is CST 3030186, page 5, paragraph 21C. We can read across. NEBOSH, you say at paragraph 21C, certificates in relation to NEBOSH Level 3 Certificate in Occupational Health and Safety and IOSH Managing Safely course are provided. He provided those. But the NEBOSH, is this right? The NEBOSH National General Certificate doesn't entitle you to use any post-nominals at all, does it?
No.
No. And as far as IOSH is concerned, if we look at the IOSH certificate, that's at CST 3030167. It says at the very bottom, if we can blow up the certificate for that course, possession of this certificate does not confer exemption from professional examinations which lead to corporate membership of the Institute of Occupational Health and Safety. Would you accept that in the light of that qualification, you knew that you couldn't use the post-nominal IOSH, IOSH?
Agreed, sir, but they were never meant to be post-nominals. As with hindsight, these were courses and qualifications passed to, in my view at the time, to say that I was a competent person to undertake a risk assessment by virtue of course, training and experience.
And the same applies to NEBOSH, doesn't it? You weren't entitled to use the post-nominal or use a post-nominal NEBOSH by virtue merely of holding that certificate. You agree?
Agree.
Yes. Looking at the next one then, if we can go back please to your pro forma 3071. The next one is IFE Assessor Stroke Auditor FSO. You see that there.
Yes.
Presumably you knew that the IFE was a professional body with a registration scheme.
At this particular time, I don't know whether the scheme was in being or not, but again, with hindsight, this was clarified that it should have been put down an assessor auditor undertake an IFE course,
Yes.
not as a post-nominal.
Indeed, but using the post-nominal IFE Assessor Stroke Auditor FSA would give the impression to the uninitiated or even to the initiated that you were registered with the IFE, wouldn't it?
It could be seen like that, but if you looked it up, I wouldn't be on their list. And if anyone had asked me, I'd have told them I wasn't.
Yes, and it's right, isn't it, that you hadn't actually applied at that time
No.
for registration. And indeed, looking at the certificate you received, which you've exhibited, CST 3030166, it says at the bottom there, and you've quoted it in your second witness statement at 21G, but let's have it in the original. An IFE approved course is any course that has been assessed by the Institution of Fire Engineers as not equivalent to the institution's examinations in whole or part, but which is of a standard and quality that is worthy of association with the institution. Now, that sentence does not imply that you can use a post-nominal to indicate that you are an IFE assessor or auditor, does it?
Correct.
And you must have been aware of that at the time, surely, when you wrote this into the 41 High Street FRA and sent it to the TMO?
No, I was. My understanding was that I was putting down courses attended. There was never anything else to deceive or even highlight anything else but these are courses and competencies.
Why didn't you make that clear?
With hindsight, it would have been a lot easier if I had made it clear, sir.
You say with hindsight, as you kept saying, Mr. Stokes, but the reality is that you must have known at the time that these post-nominals had either come out of your own head or because they didn't exist, or were thoroughly misleading truncations of the fact that you'd done courses but hadn't actually obtained qualifications. Do you accept that?
Yes.
Let's just look at what Mr. Todd says, please. CTA 6011, page 58. Mr. Todd says at paragraph 6.48 on that page, at the very foot of your screen, it is clear that either Mr. Stokes is somewhat lacking in understanding regarding the proper use of post-nominals, or that he was at least endeavouring to overstate his qualifications. In either case, the manner in which he set out the supposed post-nominals would, in my opinion, significantly mislead clients and potential clients as to his qualifications, regardless of his level of competence. Now, that is Mr. Todd's conclusion as a result of a close analysis of your stated qualifications at paragraph 6.46 of his report at pages 55 to 58. First of all, have you read those paragraphs
Yes.
before coming here today? Do you accept the conclusion that I've just read out to you from paragraph 6.48?
Yes.
Thank you. And do you agree that by doing so you significantly misled any reader of your FRAs as to your qualifications?
No, I don't. Because if anyone had asked me, I'd have explained and told them. And from the first one, I didn't understand the use of post-nominals. Sorry.
Can we then go back to your FRA that we looked at before, CST 403071, page 3 again, please. After the post-nominals, which we've looked at, and I've read this to you as well, you say 3 years as an independent fire risk assessor. In fact, it's right, as you told us earlier, that while you were at Oxfordshire, you hadn't done any independent fire risk assessor work. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
In fact, that only started when you began to work for Salvas on the 24th of September 2009, yes? Yes?
Correct.
Yes. So by the 29th of December 2010, which is the date of this document, you had at most worked for 15 months as an independent fire risk assessor.
I'd undertaken risk assessments before that, but not for money or gain.
And again, does that suggest that you exaggerated your experience as a fire risk assessor?
No.
You hadn't been an independent fire risk assessor for 3 years, as at the date of this document, had you?
So the date of this document is, sir?
29th of December 2010.
No.
I'm so sorry, I've misled you. Page 1, 21st of August 2010. So even more so.
No.
Yeah. And that also had the potential to mislead clients as to the level of your experience. You accept that?
Yes.
Yes. Now, could we go back to we'll stick with page 3. You say, member of the construction industry CPD certification service. Now, in your FRAs for Grenfell Tower, and you do amend this paragraph each year to show the number of years of membership. In fact, it's right, isn't it, that only involved attendance at training courses?
Yes.
Yes. There was no service or body of which you were...
No.
No. And again, by suggesting that you were a member was inaccurate and potentially misleading.
Well, as a member, I received emails from them. I received documentation from them.
You apply for it and get it. You don't become a member of a recognised body, do you?
It was never meant to be that now. So.
And you don't have any certification after 2009 to show that you attended training courses run by the Construction CPD Certification Service?
After which date, sir?
2009.
I've been on them. I used to go on them at least once, twice, 3 times a year.
Yes, you haven't. I don't think you provided any certification to show that you attended those training courses after 2009.
I don't know, sir.
Right.
I've been on them. I still get emails today.
Was it right to say that you were in some way still affiliated with that organisation in 2014 when you did your October 2014 FRA? Yes. For Grenfell?
For the CPD, yes.
Right. Can we then go back to the tender application and the consultant's brief, please? CST 705, and look, please, at page 5. On that page, you can see quality 3.0, and under that, 3.1, consultants are expected to provide a consistently high-quality service and should be able to demonstrate through documentation that their organisations are capable of maintaining a quality standard that satisfies all contractual requirements. The TMO require consultants to be able to satisfy the provisions of a quality management system as set out in BSEN ISO 9001, and preferably be registered to a UCAS certification body. How did you demonstrate to the TMO that you could satisfy the provisions of BSEN ISO 9001?
I don't think it ever came up, sir.
So they didn't ask you, and you didn't demonstrate or purport to demonstrate that you could satisfy those provisions?
No.
Right. During your interview, were you asked about your competence?
My competence, yes.
Yeah. Were you not asked, can you satisfy the provisions of quality management under BSE and ISO 9001?
I wouldn't remember, sir.
If we look at page 3, please, back to page 3 and look at paragraph 1.10 at the foot of the page. We may have to blow that up. It's a little small on the screen there. The consultant's appointment will be for 1 year, for a 1 year period, with a TMO only discretionary option to extend for a further 1 year, subject to the consultant's satisfactory performance. Once you were appointed as the fire risk assessor for the medium risk programme, is it right that your contract was never formally renewed?
That's correct.
It just rolled along, is that
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Right. Did you ever ask yourself why that was?
If they'd have questioned, I would have answered the question, but it was never something that sprang to mind.
So you just let a sleeping dog lie and just kept taking the work?
That's the way you interpret it, but
Yeah.
it didn't come to my mind.
Yeah, I'm not criticising you for it. I just was trying to work out what happened. So did the TMO ever tell you that your appointment was to be treated as permanent until terminated?
No, it just carried on.
So it was just a working assumption that you would carry on?
Yes.
Right. Now, I want to ask you about your appointment for the low-risk blocks. It's right that you were appointed to be the fire risk assessor of the low-risk blocks, and you signed a contract for that on the 24th of August, 2011. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, I wouldn't know the date.
Is it right that you never had to application for that position or go through a formal procurement process?
From memory, that's correct.
Do you know why that is?
No.
Did you
He must have been happy with my work.
Right. Was it your understanding that the contract for the low-risk blocks included the same terms and conditions as set out in the July 2010 consultant's brief that we're looking at here, which governed your contract for the medium-risk blocks?
Yes.
Buildings? Yes. And again, was it your understanding that your position undertaking that work was never formally renewed but continued indefinitely?
Yes.
Now, it's also right, I think, as you've set out in your statement at first statement at paragraphs 25 and 26 at pages 9 and 10, I don't think there's a need to go to it, that you were also asked to carry out fire risk assessments on high-risk buildings from 2010 onwards, yes?
Yes.
But you never signed a contract for those, did you?
Correct.
Right. And again, were you never required to go through a formal procurement or application process?
I was never asked, no.
Who asked you to carry out assessments on high-risk buildings from 2010 onwards? Do you remember?
I'm going to say contact Janice Ray at CMO.
Right. Was she basically the person from whom you took your instructions and to whom you reported?
Yes.
And you say, and I'll just cite it, the paragraph 26 of your first statement at page 10, that you always operated on the understanding that all the work you did, or CS Stokes and Associates Limited, did for the TMO was governed by the terms contained in the July 2010 consultant's brief.
Yes.
That's right, is it?
Yes.
Yeah. Can I then keep with that document and examine some of the terms of the contract for the medium risk programme? And as we've established now, for all the work you did, if we go to page 6, we can see the scope of work set out. And it says in the subheading, fire risk assessments and reviews. And under paragraph 1.1, fire risk assessments will be undertaken and reviewed regularly at a frequency dictated by the degree of risk. The FRA and FRA reviews will include an individual examination of each communal fire door, including whether it operates correctly, and the findings will be clearly documented in each report. And then if you skip down to 1.3, I'll read it all to you. The FRAs and reviews will focus on, 1, the compartmentation of the building and any possible shortcomings with it. 2, the operation and adequacy of fire doors, including their fire resistance rating and smoke/fire seals, etc. 3, adequacy of firefighting equipment. 4, adequacy of automatic detection system, extraction system, sprinklers, dry risers, wet risers, etc. 5, assessment of the means of escape, to include final exit doors, and assessment of secondary means of escape where present, and its appropriateness, viability, emergency lighting, signage, etc. 6, fitness for purpose of the building in relation to fire safety. 7, fire safety management systems and their recording procedures. 8, marking of fire detection and firefighting equipment, fire doors, including their fire resistance rating and smoke/fire seals, and compartmentation on floor plans provided by the client where possible, and in all other cases to be provided by the consultant. Symbols and other information marked up on the drawings will be the same as in the HM Government Guides Fire Safety Risk Assessment. Now, is it right that a new FRA was the first FRA that you would carry out on a building, and an FRA review was any subsequent review of the same building?
Yes.
And in your first witness statement at page 16, paragraphs 47 to 48, you say, and I don't need to take you to it, prior to 2011, the LGA guidance had not been published, but I was effectively carrying out Type 1 FRAs with elements of Type 3, as they came to be categorised when LGA guidance was published in 2011. Now, let's just look at the detail of what you're talking about there in the LGA guidance. Can we go to that, please? HOM 3045964, page 44, paragraph 35.1. Yes, 34, scope of a fire risk assessment. 34.1 identifies. I'm so sorry. I think I need 35.1 at the foot of the page. Thank you. The types of fire risk assessment, and if you turn the page, you've got Type 1, common parts only, non-destructive. And it says in the first and second paragraphs, a Type 1 fire risk assessment is the basic fire risk assessment required for the purpose of satisfying the FSO. The inspection of a building is non-destructive, but as well as considering the arrangements for means of escape and so forth, the fire risk assessment includes examination of at least a sample of flat entrance doors. It also considers, so far as reasonably practicable, the separating construction between the flats and the common parts without any opening up of construction. However, in this type of fire risk assessment, entry to flats beyond the area of the flat entrance door is not involved. And then Type 2, you can see, common parts only, destructive. And then on page 46, top of page 46, Type 3, common parts and flats, non-destructive. And it says in the first paragraph, a Type 3 fire risk assessment includes the work involved in a Type 1 fire risk assessment, but goes beyond the scope of the FSO. They're not the scope of the Housing Act. This risk assessment considers the arrangements for means of escape and fire detection, i.e. smoke alarms, within at least a sample of the flats. Within the flats, the inspection is non-destructive, but the fire resistance of doors to rooms is considered. Measures to prevent fire are not considered, unless, for example, in the case of maintenance of the electrical and heating installations, the measures are within the control of, for example, the landlord. Now, just pausing there, it's right, I think, that a Type 1 FRA inspection requires you to gain access to a sample of flats in order to inspect the entirety of the flat entrance door, but nothing else within the flat.
Correct.
Yes. A Type 3 FRA, on the other hand, requires you to make further inspection arrangements within the flat, beyond the flat entrance door, so that you would look at arrangements that are within the scope of the Housing Act, but outside the scope of the RRO. Yes?
Only to what I've said.
Yes. So is it right that when you're conducting a Type 1 FRA, you need to inspect the entirety of the flat entrance door, inside and out, even just as part of a sample?
Correct.
Yes. And is it right that you need to inspect the inside of a flat entrance door because you need to inspect the strips and seals, which you can't see from the outside?
If fitted.
If fitted. and also the self-closing device, if fitted,
Yes.
which, unless it's an external self-closing device, you can't see from the outside. That's
Yes.
right. And in this country, I think it's right, isn't it, that all doors open inwards, and therefore the self-closer will be on the inside or within the door frame.
And no, you can have them on there. I've seen them before where they're on the outside of the flats.
Right. Were there any in the TMO stock, you recall?
Not springs to mind, no.
No. Now, if we go back to page 45 and look at type 1 and the second paragraph, in the third line, there's a reference there to a sample of flat entrance doors. What was your understanding of what was required when the guidance here speaks of examining a sample of flat entrance doors? By which I mean, what kind of percentage, proportion of doors would you expect to examine to satisfy yourself that you had checked a sample?
The short answer would be if there's different types, one of each type. If they were all the same, and you knew that they were all the same throughout the whole building, as long as you could sample few of those. But if there was more than one type or style, try and get as many sample or look at every one of those as possible.
When you say as long as you could sample few of those, what sort of percentage would you sample? If you had 129 fire doors, flat entrance doors, all the same, how many would you sample on any FRA?
I can't say. I would try and sample at least, on average, if I say it a different way, if I could hear music or something within the flat and I knew someone was in, I would try and knock on that door. If I could sample at least a handful, if you said 5 out of every 100, that's 5%.
I see. Do you agree that the LGA guide does not caveat, does not warn that you are only required to sample, to examine a sample of flat entrance doors if you could gain access? It doesn't say that, does it?
No.
What would happen if you couldn't get access?
I would ask, it would go into the significant findings. So if I found a door that was unusual, different, changed, damaged, it would go into the significant findings.
Right. Now, if we go to your first witness statement at page 16, let's look at paragraph 48 on this subject. You say there, paragraph 48, a type 1 FRA meant that I carried out a primarily visual, non-destructive inspection of the tower, plus some additional inspection of the inside of front doors where I could gain access from a resident and was given permission to do so. And then you go on to say, in those circumstances, which were the elements of a type 3 FRA to which I referred, I would check the self-closer and see whether there was a domestic fire alarm system fitted in the dwelling. In 2015, I was also asked to check the heat interface units, so I had some knowledge of this when conducting the April and June 2016 FRAs. Now, this paragraph seems to suggest that you only considered that a check of the self-closing devices was required in the case of a type 3 FRA. Is that right?
Well, if I was doing a type 1 and I couldn't gain access, I couldn't then check the self-closers because I didn't have access internally. So looking at that, it would only be when you've got access to the flat, could you check the self-closer internally, the smoke seal, if they were fitted, or anything inside. So it was a type 3 if you could gain access.
That can't be right, can it, with great respect, because type 1 requires you to sample the flat front doors and look at the self-closers.
Correct. So that would then go to a type 3 because you are going inside the door, because I'm looking at the type 3 would be to look at the fire alarm system fitted as well.
That I understand. But do you accept that type 3 would not involve, type 1 would involve gaining access to look at the seals and to look at the door closers?
Correct.
Yes. That's not only type 3, although under type 3 you could do that as well.
Yes.
Yes, I see. So that's a clarification. Can we then look, please, at paragraph 42 of this statement on the previous page. I want to address now the question of the compartmentation principle. You say here, when undertaking FRAs at the tower, I was therefore essentially looking for anything in the common parts which would or could negatively impact the integrity of the compartments, thereby undermining the compartmentation principle on which the tower was built, and in turn the fire safety of the tower. Where I was given cause to have concern that compartmentation may be compromised, I raised this in the significant findings schedules appended to the relevant FRAs. Now, I want to just focus your mind there on your words, anything in the common parts, that's what you say there, and now ask you to look, please, at the LGA guide, HOM 45964, at page 26. And if we look on that page at Part 17, compartmentation, you can see under paragraph 17.1, it says, the high degree of fire separation between flats and the common parts is achieved by making each flat a fire-resisting enclosure. This is known as compartmentation. A compartment is simply a part of a building bounded by walls and floors that will resist the passage of fire for a specified period of time. The fire resistance of this construction is such that normally a fire will burn itself out before spreading to other parts of the building. And then if you look at the box at the bottom of the page, it says in bold, it needs to be ensured that the fire-resisting enclosure of flats is maintained at all openings, including, and there are 4 bullet points. First bullet, flat entrance and other doors. Second bullet, any internal windows into the access corridor or any glazing above or around the flat entrance door. Third bullet, openings in walls and floors for services such as water, gas and electricity. Fourth bullet, vents into shared air supply ducts, but more commonly shared extract ducts from bathrooms and sometimes kitchens. And then over the page, openings in walls and floors for communal heating systems, and then the next bullet, doorways and hatches in walls for access to read electricity and gas meters. Were you always, or at least after July 2011, aware of the principle I've just read to you here?
Yes.
Can we then look at the scope of a fire risk assessment, which is also governed by this guide, at page 44, please? Paragraphs 34.1 to 34.5. 34 governs scope of a fire risk assessment, and 34.1 says, as the fire risk assessment is concerned with fire safety, within the common parts, the flats themselves are outside the scope of the FSO. Accordingly, the scope of the fire risk assessment required by the FSO does not include measures to protect residents from a fire in their own flat. However, it will normally be necessary to gain limited entry to at least a sample of flats. This is to examine the necessary measures to ensure, when a fire occurs in a flat, that there is not undue risk to other residents. And we've already looked at that a little bit in the context of door closers and seals. And then if you look a little bit lower down, 34.5, bottom of your screen, it says the fire risk assessment must also consider the maintenance arrangements for all measures required under the FSO, or in the case of equipment and facilities for the fire and rescue service under building regulations. Just looking at that, would you agree that it was necessary for you to gain limited entry to at least a sample of flats in order to examine the necessary measures to ensure that when a fire occurs in a flat, there is not undue risk to other residents, as paragraph 34.1 identifies?
Yes. We should be part of the type 3.
Would you agree that an FRA must consider or take account of the maintenance arrangements for all measures required under the FSO?
All maintenance measures?
Yes.
So I don't understand.
Well, at 34.5, the fire risk assessment must also consider the maintenance arrangements for all measures required under the FSO.
Yes.
So, yes. So, and was that a principle that you were always aware of?
Yes.
At least from the time of the publication of this guidance?
Yes.
Yes. Now, can we then look at PAS 79, PAS 79, 2012, and Appendix H of the Competence Standard. This is CTA 703, please. Now, that is the first page of a document we're going to be looking at in some detail. It's PAS 79, 2012, and it's entitled Fire Risk Assessment, Guidance and a Recommended Methodology. And if we go, please, to page 65, which is Appendix wait, can we go to page 65? Just a moment. Yes, I'm so sorry. Page 73. A competent fire, you can see in the second paragraph, under this heading, fire protection, a competent fire risk assessor must have the ability to identify correctly the passive and active elements of fire protection / design and their role in the provision of fire safety in the building. This would include how they may interact. For example, if the fire alarm system triggers a door release mechanism to release held open doors to the closed position. The fire risk assessor should understand the availability and value of third-party certification schemes. Pausing there, do you agree that that was part of your job?
Yes.
And further down the same page, it says, accordingly, the fire risk assessor should be able to, and you can see there are 4 sub-paragraphs there. 1, determine the need for fire protection systems and equipment. 2, identify any major failings in the level of passive and or active fire protection provided by existing systems and equipment from documentation, by observation, and, where necessary, inspection of the measures that are not immediately visible. 3, within the action plan of the fire risk assessment, write a brief outline requirement for new or upgraded systems and equipment. 4, demonstrate an ability to correctly identify the purpose, function and suitability of passive or active elements of fire protection and design, or / design. Again, do you agree that that was part of your role?
Yes.
And in respect of the passive and active elements, they're listed on the right-hand column of page 73. You can see them there under Appendix H1. If we just scroll to the top of the screen, Appendix H1, passive fire protection, and you can scroll down and see cavity barriers, fire-resisting ceiling systems, compartment walls and floors, and if we scroll further down, fire doors and furniture, and then over the page, onto page 74, further items there. You see those there. And if you go to page 75, you can also see the rest of the active fire protection measures. Would you agree that you would need to have knowledge and understanding of their role of each of these different elements in the provision of fire safety when conducting your work?
Yes.
And if we go to page 73 again, please, just back to that. I picked it up briefly, but note the reference there to under fire doors and furniture. Second bullet point, the importance of suitable fire-rated ironmongery, e.g. self-closing devices, latches. So that was clear to you at all times, was it? Yes. And let's then turn to the subject of flat entrance doors. Can we go back to the consultant's brief, July 2010, at CST 705, please, page 6. And I want to pick up something I think picked up very briefly with you earlier. On page 6 of this brief, which, as we know, contained the terms of your contract with the TMO throughout, Part 2, specification of services, 1, scope of works, and then under 1.3, Roman 2, the operation and adequacy of fire doors, including their fire resistance rating and smoke/fire seals. We looked at that earlier. You accepted, I think, that was very much part of your work. But can we then look, please, at your first witness statement, page 16, paragraph 44. You say there, Pursuant to the scope of the FSO, as discussed at paragraph 36 above, and in line with the contract, CS Stokes was only required to assess the common parts, i.e. Roman 2, 3 and 4 above, as well as the lift lobby facing side of the flat entrance of the flat front doors, but not the flats themselves, i.e. the common parts, but not all of the compartments. The insides of the flats and external walls of the building fell outside of my remit, and in my view, that of the FSO. Again, I discussed this further below at section F, below. Now, when you say the lift lobby facing side of the flat front doors, you appear to be suggesting that you did not think that it was part of your role to check the inside of flat entrance doors, including the self-closing devices. It doesn't sound as if that's what you're saying.
I'm not.
You're not saying that. No, that's not. It is not your evidence. So to be clear, it was part of your role to check the inside of flat entrance doors, including self-closing devices.
On a sample, yes.
Yeah, on a sample basis.
But as a type 1 visual, no.
Right. So when you say, as well as lift lobby facing side of the flat front doors, that's not right, is it? Because in fact you were obliged to inspect on a sample basis the other side of the flat front doors and the existence of seals, where you could on a sample
basis.
Right. So we have to qualify that line, do we?
Yes.
Yes. Can I ask you then about external walls? In your first, sticking with this statement, your first witness statement, can we go to page 8, please, and look at paragraph 24? Here you've highlighted at paragraph 24 the fact that, well, you've highlighted paragraph 1.1 of part 1 of the brief, and you've set it out. You say this brief specifies the requirements for fire risk assessments, FRAs, in the communal areas, and you've underlined those. And then you go on to say at the foot of the page, however, this definition plainly did not include the external walls of the building concerned, as the FSO does not either, and I was not asked to approach the FRAs otherwise. See further section F. Now, I just want to look at that a little bit more closely. Can we look back, please, at PAS 79, at CTA 703, page 73, which we looked at a moment ago under Appendix H. And on that page, top of the right-hand column, if we can scroll up to it, please, H1, passive fire protection. The fire risk assessor should have a knowledge and understanding of the role of in the provision of fire safety, including the types of fire performance requirements, load-bearing capacity, integrity, insulation, reaction to fire performance, etc., of the following. And I gave you the list before. And then if you go down onto page 74, left-hand column, let me focus you on it. The very foot of the page, if you can blow that up, please. It says the building envelope, bottom left, the building envelope, e.g. fire-resisting external walls, curtain walls. First bullet, the significance of their role in protecting escape routes at boundaries. Second bullet, the significance of any immediately visible damage. Third bullet, the importance of remedying any immediately visible damage in sandwich panel constructions using combustible insulating cores. Now, given what's said there, as I've shown you in PAS 79, would you agree that you were required to have knowledge and understanding of the fire-resisting external walls in the provision of fire safety?
Yes.
And given that it states that you needed to know about the significance of their role in protecting escape routes at boundaries and immediately visible damage, that suggests, doesn't it, that you were also required to inspect them as part of your task?
The first one is significance of their role in protecting escape routes at boundaries.
Yes.
So that's the boundary on the external of the building. So My understanding of that is the boundary as it affects an external staircase that's coming down the outside of the building or the building that's opposite.
Would that also include the point at which someone leaving the building in a fire would actually go out of the door?
That would be protected anyway, sir, because of that's external facade of the building. This here is protecting escape routes at the boundary. I would understand that to be the boundary, because under building regulations, the boundary means how close another building can be built to that construction.
Right, thank you.
And what about the significance of any immediately visible damage in the building envelope?
On that one, it would only be out of practicality. If you were, say, on the roof and they have a roof garden, is there any physical damage going back in? Because if it was an 18-floor building, you would need a pair of binoculars or something to look up the building to try and find any damage further up. Or how is there any visible damage on an escape route? So, for instance, trying to put it into, if you had an external staircase and it was damaged around the staircase as it was coming down, you would see that.
Yes. Did you ever read anything into what I've just read you here relating to the building envelope, which would suggest that you should examine the building envelope with a view to seeing whether it posed a challenge to compartmentation in the building more generally?
My understanding is that, as I have highlighted in the risk assessment significant findings, I did the building envelope after the refurb. If we're talking about this building, did it comply with building regs? That was, I had an understanding that the external facade could be a problem. And that's my take, was to say, does it comply with building regs approval?
Yes. My question is a slightly different one, which is, did you ever read anything into this part of PAS 79 which required you to examine the building envelope with a view to asking the question, how does this affect the compartmentation of the building generally, as a fire risk assessor?
In as much as it's on the outside of the building, yes.
What do you mean by that?
Well, because it's on the outside of the building, it overlaps all the external balcony facades of the flats.
And explain the relevance of that to your job as a fire risk assessor.
Well, it's adding something to the building that wasn't already there. So if we're talking about this building and in relation to this building, it was a concrete facade. Now they're doing something different. So I highlighted that they're doing something different. It must comply to building regs.
You're leaving aside the building regulations. Did you read anything into this part of PAS 79, the need to consider the building envelope, with a view to asking the question, how does that affect compartmentation?
Yes.
You did?
Yes.
Was that a routine?
Yes.
You do that routine? You did, right. Thank you. We'll come back to that later. Moving on then, did you receive, or were you aware of, letters sent by the LFB to local authorities which provided guidance on fire safety matters?
Some, yes.
How would you get those routinely, very generally?
Sometimes, though, in this particular case, the TMO could pass them on to me.
Right.
Or you could, the LFB have them on their website.
Right. Let's look at an example. TMO 00870149. This is a letter from Steve Turek, disclosed by the TMO, although it's addressed to the London Borough of Brent. Let's not worry about how it comes to the TMO. It's a letter from Steve Turek, who was the Assistant Commissioner for Fire Safety Regulation. And it's dated, as you can see, the 17th of March 2009. And the heading is Fire Safety and Social Housing. And if you look down the page, lower down page one, lower down on your screen, the second title down there is Fire Doors Being Wedged Open, resulting in both smoke spread and damage to self-closing devices. And it goes on, poor adjustment of self-closing devices or inappropriate choice of closer type has been found to have caused fire doors to close very quickly and so loudly bang into their frame, disturbing nearby residents. Because of this, residents wedged the fire doors or placed materials at the foot of the frame to stop the door fully closing and so avoiding the loud bang. Repeated wedging of doors in this way was found to have weakened some types of door closers, mainly those contained within the door structure, to the extent that they failed to fully close even when not wedged. These circumstances have allowed smoke to easily spread through blocks of flats and ultimately to enter flats which would otherwise have been reasonably protected from the effects of fire and smoke. And then if you turn to page 2, you can see replacement windows and some text there about replacement windows. And on page 3, we can see at the foot, under conclusion, he says, as enforcing authority, in the second line, as enforcing authority for the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order 2005, we consider that the structure of the building and changes that have been made to it, levels of fire resistance, e.g. fire stopping and working fire doors, the availability of locations and sources of fuel for deliberate fire setting, and ignition sources that are introduced to the premises are matters that should be considered as part of a suitable and sufficient fire risk assessment. I'm sure that you, as a responsible provider of social housing, would agree, and I would urge you to ensure that these matters are considered as part of your ongoing programme of fire risk assessment and reviews of those assessments. Now, the date of this, as I've shown you, is March 2009. At that time, you were working at Salvas, or for Salvas. Did you see this letter at the time, do you think?
This letter is not familiar.
It's not familiar. Nonetheless, did you think that in any case you had to inspect self-closing devices on flat entrance doors? In other words, what's being said by Steve Turek would not have been a surprise to you had you seen the letter.
It's not a surprise at all, no.
What about the suggestion that the structure of the building and any changes to it should be considered as part of the fire risk assessment? Was that something that you understood from the time?
Yes.
Yes. Does that mean that you would inspect exterior panels when conducting your FRA visits?
Not per se, but I would, if they were a change to the building and being put on the building, it would have to go through the building regulations process to start with.
Right. Were you familiar with the fact that, even though you didn't see this letter at the time, the LFB had raised these issues with providers of social housing in London in the spring of 2009?
It wouldn't surprise me at all.
No, but did you know that in general they had done that?
Not in general, but it wouldn't surprise me that they had done it.
Why wouldn't it surprise you?
Because I would have thought it would be part of their fire precautions work to inform.
You were working in the industry at the time. Do you remember any particular event that occurred which might have prompted the LFB to write a letter reinforcing?
I'm just trying to think when Lacknell House was, the date of Lacknell House.
Lacknell House was the 3rd of July 2009, so it was pre-Lacknell.
It springs to mind as a...
Right. Let's turn to a different topic, which is the appointment and the method for carrying out FRAs that you pursued. You were notified, I think this is right, that you were the successful tenderer for the TMO's medium risk programme on the 23rd of September 2010. Do you remember that?
No, but if you tell me that's the date, that was the date.
I can show you. I can show you a document.
Yes, I'm not just believing you, sir.
Yes. Well, let me take a small run up to this. Do you remember meeting Janice Ray of the TMO in 2010 before you were told you were the successful tenderer to discuss your appointment?
No.
What about at the moment you were told you were the winner? Did you meet her then and discuss your appointment?
I don't know if it was over the phone I was told or what, but right. I would have met her at that time.
Right. Well, let's go to a document. CST 401887, please. Now, this is a letter dated the 23rd of June 2010 from you to Janice Ray. And it actually predates the consultant's brief document for the medium risk programme, because that's July 2010. And it says, subject, employee fire training, personnel emergency evacuation plans, PEEPs, and the lift maintenance, servicing and testing policy in TMO controlled buildings. Dear Ray, after our meeting yesterday, Tuesday, 22nd of June 2010, at 10:30 a.m. at the Hub, Kensal Road, North Kensington, I would like to excuse me, clarify the following items and issues about employee induction and refresher fire training. The policies and documents covered today also have a relevant for fire warden training, which is given to selected employees. You see that?
Yes.
And then it goes on. When completing any fire risk assessments for buildings under the control of the Tenants Management Organisation, TMO, of the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea in future, and where TMO employees are present in the buildings, the information in this letter will be used as the basis of the fire training and fire warden section of the document. The information on lifts will be used in the relevant section for fixed installations, as well as in the section on disabled persons and their evacuation procedure when using lifts. The PEEPs documents, again, will be used as evidence in the disabled persons section. Were you meeting Janice Ray on the 22nd of June 2010 to discuss what to include in certain sections?
Oh, that's what it reads here, yes.
Yes. Why were you meeting her on that date were you meeting her in your capacity as fire risk assessor for Stokes?
That's what it looks like, yes.
Why was that?
Sorry, I can't answer that question.
Because this is before you had even tendered for the fire risk assessment work with the TMO, wasn't it?
I don't know the dates. I haven't got listed in front of me. But
Well, let me.
I would be asking these questions. Sorry, sir. I'd be asking these questions to fill out items within any risk assessment.
Right. So you say any risk assessment?
Well, if I was undertaking a risk assessment, these are the sort of questions. If I was coming up with problems or the same type of deficiencies at that point, this is to clarify for all these points.
Why were you meeting Janice Ray to discuss these matters in your capacity as a fire risk assessor for CS Stokes and Associates Limited?
I can't answer that question.
And the reason I suggest that is before you'd even tendered for the fire risk assessment work with the TMO is because you only submitted that tender on the 24th of August 2010.
I can't answer that. I don't know. My recollection's not.
Right. I mean, we have a document, CST 402368, page 4. I just want to put that in front of you so that we can pin the date down in case it helps you. That's the date of your tender.
Okay.
So the question is, why were you meeting with Janice Ray as CS Stokes and Associates Limited to discuss an FRA on the 22nd of June 2010? Do you know?
No, I don't.
Do you know when it was discussed and agreed that you would be the TMO's fire risk assessor?
No.
Was it before the formal procurement process was at an end? Do you know?
Sorry, I can't remember. I can't remember the dates.
Right. If we go back to the letter, please.
Mm-hmm.
CST 401887. Was this for all buildings, regardless of risk level? In other words, high, medium, and low?
There's no indication there for what it was for, so I would say yes.
Right. Right. Now, we'll come back to the substance of the detail of the letter, detail of the points in the letter later, but in general, was the purpose of this meeting to discuss how you would conduct your fire risk assessments generally, or just in relation to the matters in this letter?
Sorry, I don't know the answer. No.
Do you remember whether you discussed the consultant's brief so far as it existed, or a draft of that?
No, I can't remember.
Did you discuss your qualifications?
I would have done, yes.
Right. What about the tender for the medium risk properties? well, we can see you didn't make that until later, but was there any discussion about how you should go about making that tender?
I wouldn't have thought so. I mean, it wouldn't be etiquette, wouldn't.
Right. Well, let's go to the end of the letter, please, at page 3. You can see that you say there, I would like to thank you for all the help you gave to me yesterday, because as we discussed it during our meeting, the items covered in policy and procedure documents you showed me will help tremendously to reduce the question I may have needed to ask, and gave me a very good understanding of TMO operating policy in relation to health and safety issues. What policy and procedure documents did Janice Ray show you?
Again, I can't remember.
Did you ask for any information about employee fire training, PEEPs and lifts?
That's what it says there. That's why I asked for it.
Right.
Yes.
Was it your intention at the time that you would add that information to your fire risk assessments and then use that information repeatedly after that in all your fire risk assessments for the TMO?
Unless it was updated, I would have said yes.
Yes. And how would you get updates? How would you get information that would require you to make updates, generally?
Email or telephone.
Right, on specific matters?
Yes.
And when you say it gave you very good understanding of the TMO operating policy in relation to health and safety issues, did that include an understanding of TMO's operating policy in relation to fire safety or health and safety generally?
It says health and safety there, so health and safety generally, I would have thought.
Mr. Chairman, that's a convenient moment. We're in the middle of a piece of the chronology, but it's a convenient moment.
Yeah, but if that's a good point, I suggest we take a break at this point.
It is.
Right, thank you. Well, Mr. Stokes, I think we've got to the point at which we ought all to have a break for lunch. So we're going to do that now. We're going to resume, please, at 2 o'clock. And remember not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it over the break, please. All right?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. We'd like to go to the usher. Thank you. Thank you. 2 o'clock then, please.